For nasal use only. I'm not sure what other orifice might need decongesting.
Right, let me just plug this in.
Right, all good, I think.
Dr. Dempsey, who the hell are you?
Who the hell am I? Who the hell am I?
Sorry to throw you in the deep end there.
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to say thanks for that is in the deep end. Who the hell am I? I am a PhD of geochemistry.
Awesome.
I am a lover of education in general, like everything education, and I am a seeker of freedom, which I know is close to your heart. So I'm a seeker of wanting to do things on my own term and have autonomy and independence over how I choose to live.
Fantastic. Yes. Welcome everybody to the Prismatic Podcast. We are, of course, all about providing the toolkits with which to deliver a life of freedom, achieve a life on your terms. And as part of that, I want to introduce you to my good friend, Scott Dempsey. So Scott, we've known each other, 5-6 years now. We met as part of a digital marketing conference. And we definitely, we sort of built a load of rapport over our views on education, as much as we, of course, we value our own education hugely, but felt that education in its conventional education in its current form sort of let us down a little bit. And so Scott, maybe you can talk about your experience of the modern education system, to what extent you are still a huge fan of education, but also where you would critique it. And we can just use that as our starting point before we delve deeper.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it's an interesting viewpoint from where I come from, because I still work with students. So as part of my kind of career, I coach and see where a lot of students are heading and where their mindset is. And of course, I spent myself 10 years at university. Some would say that is probably a few years too long, but I certainly would. And I kind of felt a bit frustrated, like that I had gone through this whole process and came out of the back end of it really with no clarity or direction. I mean, I went into a couple of jobs which really were just not well suited to who I was, not even well suited to the skill set I developed. But there was nothing to really, tell me that was going to be the case when I was at university. There was no kind of direction from any particular angle. And this is what I see with a lot of students today. Like, a lot of students are in this position where I don't really think sometimes they know kind of what they're doing it for. I don't think they know, why they're learning and why the content they're learning is important. And in some cases it's probably not important, but in many cases where it is important, I don't think they know where it's leading, other than the traditional route, which is, you go to school, you potentially, if you're lucky enough, if people perceive they're lucky enough, go to university, and then you go onto a career ladder of some sort, which is quite I think a dated way of potentially looking at how to progress through your young life into a career.
I remember being distinctly shocked when I left uni and went into a job as well. And if I was to summarize it in a sentence, it was just that it was not about how well you did stuff, it was about what you delivered. And it sounds so bloody obvious saying it now, but it's amazing how deep that conditioning went coming out of university. Even for someone like me, who, if I like to think of myself as relatively free thinking and independent, but
Absolutely.
if I was affected to such a degree by that notion of just doing things really, really well, doing what you're told really well, but not necessarily thinking in terms of what does the client want? Why are we doing this? What's actually driving the need for this? So that was my experience. But is there anything what about yours? What was the biggest shock to you? What was the biggest difference coming out of uni and going into a job?
I think it was that. I think that didn't seem to be any relevance, like, from what I was doing before, because let's face it, like, the educational system is brought about and run by academics, and it suits academics and it suits people who are engaged in research, and people who are very well suited to that profession. It's really not well suited to a transition into any other form of work, and for that reason, when you end up kind of making that transition, most people realize how short they are on the skill sets required to actually kind of go from what is effectively a bubble. Education in many senses is quite, let's face it, some of the skeptics would suggest that it's a place of conditioning where you're almost everything's very instructional, so you don't really have a huge amount of autonomy in that environment. Into a different environment where everyone is really at that point stage working for themselves. Now, yes, you go into companies and things, but you need to have a completely different skill set from the one which is developed in a formal kind of educational sense. And the biggest thing for me, and I still see this, and the biggest thing which really helped me was getting to understand myself a bit more. Like, actually, what did I value? What did I want from my work? What were my strengths? What were my skill sets? Because let's face it, like, just having a degree in a particular subject is not the value at all. Like, let's say that someone today goes and gets a degree in digital marketing. Well, all of that knowledge is going to be obsolete in a year's time when things move on and change so very quickly. I imagine that most of the careers today, or most of the careers that are going to be available in 5 years' time, aren't even probably thought about today. So you can't prepare for a specific career, but you can develop skills that are required, for particular kind of paths.
And that always used to be the way with education and higher education in the past. 10 years ago, perhaps, maybe 30 years ago. All right, want to be a dentist? Go and study dentistry.
Right.
And there's certain skills that stand the test of time to a degree. Right? We'll see how well that does. But things, I think there's the world has changed to the point where you have to question how relevant is education in its current form to actually delivering value in the world today. And you touched on something really important there, which was that to paraphrase you, the biggest value of going to university is to prove that you can, right, in a way,
right,
as opposed to gathering the skills you actually need to create value.
Right.
And this is something that was drummed into me by my mother. It was go and do that, and then at least you can prove that you can.
Yeah.
And not only that, teachers as well. I had one teacher who probably gave me what I would consider the polar opposite of good advice, or what would have been the right advice for me. She said to do a modular degree, if at all possible, so that you don't have to specialize too early. Essentially is what she said. Like, don't do something that gives you variety, studies a number of different things, and you can still get a degree, as it were, but you're not typecasting yourself. And so I did environmental sciences. It was obviously my choice, and it was based on a number of factors and influences. But I studied economics, oceanography, meteorology. I did energy, like social sciences, how to solve energy. What do we do about the energy crisis? What do we, geosciences, like atmospheric sciences. It was so diverse. and it didn't really set me up to do anything. So it was really about saying, okay, I've got this degree. Look, I'm at this level. But frankly, everyone fucking knew that anyway. Like anyone who goes to uni comes out with a 2-1. So like, big surprise, right? Like, what is that whole process for? You go in, and maybe like 3% of people don't make it, but the rest get divided into first 2-1s, and maybe the occasional 2-2 degree.
Yeah.
So it's all.
That's really interesting.
It seems like one big charade, doesn't it?
Yeah, because if you specialise too finely as well, what happens? So I almost did the opposite of that. So I did a basic kind of when I say a basic, I mean, like fundamentally my degree was geoscience. So I learned all of the aspects of geoscience. Then of course, as part of your PhD, as you go kind of further up the educational chain, you specialise. But then of course you specialise to the point at which, you have a very narrow band from which to use that specialization. And so if things change, so in my experience, what happened was the oil and gas industry, kind of the bottom came out of it. And a lot of people who had specialized for years in geoscience ended up being made redundant and not being able to find work. And obviously the same thing happened with the financial industry in 2008. If you had just say in 2008 you just graduated with your financial degree, and your plan had been to go and be like a trader in the city, it would have been a very suddenly you've got to think, what do I do with this now, because things change, and that the same thing happened to me in geoscience.
Well, that was more the result of market cycles, and things that happen in the market, as opposed to ever evolving geopolitical situations or changing technology, which is the biggie. That is the biggie. There's a huge factor to consider here, which is that what even is a job in 5 years' time, right? What does it even mean?
Right.
What jobs, as it were, are going to be there in 10 years' time, 20 years' time? Is job even a metric of good? Is it even something we want to consider? Do we just want to create jobs? Aren't we sort of using the tail to wag a dog there?
100%.
What is the purpose of a job, right? Isn't the idea of a job to create value? What if that value is being created by some other means, by some automatic means, robots, AI?
Right. No, exactly. And I think the word job and work have very different synonyms. If you look at synonyms, I think particularly for work, it's everything from like effectively manual labor all the way through to kind of a creative pursuit, and so you get this broad swathe of kind of connotations which come along with the word work, and in particular job. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the word job, but I guess I don't think it really says the type of thing I want to be. I don't think it really kind of encapsulates what should be a modern career today.
It feels pretty old school. It feels like an old school word, but
this whole system that we're talking about is old school, right?
I remember last time I had a job, and I was working for EE, the phone company. So for those outside England, it's the UK's largest telecommunications company, and it's a declining industry, and it's a big, burdensome corporate organisation. And I remember by the end of it, well, at least the end for me, and as the company was being bought out by BT, people were whinging and moaning and saying, oh, this is wrong. But I remember one of the managers sort of saying, well, but you know what, as far as jobs go, it's still not bad. And I'm thinking, yeah, as far as jobs go, who says you have to go out and find a job?
Yeah, that's the thing. And there will be people who say you should be grateful that you've got a job.
Yeah. So I want to go back to something you said earlier about, you talked about the two different mindsets needed really for sort of following the path of education and work versus the path of creating something, building something yourself. But do you feel that I mean, are you suggesting that maybe some people should go down one or some people should go down the other? Is there a case for everyone just going freelance and entrepreneurial, at least at some level, or is the system still set up for people who want to follow a fixed path, and is it set up pretty well for that?
Yeah, that's okay. Really good question. I think that really will depend on a person's kind of inherent personality traits. I think that some people actually want to be part of something and not have so much autonomy. I think some people prefer conformity. It's certainly one of like a prominent personality trait, and even within education. Exactly, and even in education itself, it suits certain people. It suits introverts who are happy to spend more time in books. It suits people who are, or should we say, personalities who are potentially slightly more prone to be conscientious in their approach towards things. But it doesn't necessarily, suit people who are more higher on, say, extroversion scales. So people who prefer to have far more kind of interaction with other people, and for them, where social stimulus is very much a priority. And so, I think it really comes into understanding yourself, understanding and knowing kind of what type of environment is going to suit your personality, your temperament, because I think if we all, I know it's become like very much entrepreneurship has become a buzzword in the last few years, and it will follow a cycle where it no longer is a buzzword, I'm sure, in the future. But this idea of being your own boss and having your own life in your own hands is desirable, yes, but it's desirable, I don't think, to everyone. It's desirable to a certain subset of people, and we saw that when we went to when we first met, when we were in the kind of community of digital marketers. They were all seeking something very similar, and you could see our personality traits were very similar. We had different backgrounds, but we're all seeking something quite similar. Now, I see a lot of people who the idea of that would horrify them, or it wouldn't. When I say horrify them, it's not something they would to go and seek. They actually really enjoy being part of a structure, and not taking the lead, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the word entrepreneur has a very different meaning these days. In fact, I don't even like the word. I think that it should. I think it's quite grandiose, really. When you think about entrepreneurs, like say like Richard Branson, okay, people like who are billionaires who have built something huge and running huge companies. I think the defining characteristic of an entrepreneur in the traditional sense comes down to their tolerance of risk.
Yes.
And their ability to just completely let that go. And they know in their head and their heart that whatever happens, they're kind of going to be okay. Okay, if everything goes to shit and we lose all our investment, I'll figure it out somehow, And we've all got some degree of that. But some people just have so much that they will literally put everything on the line. Like Elon Musk, he was worth how many hundreds of millions before he bet it all on his next thing. So that he's like a clearly natural entrepreneur, in that he's willing to get to a point where he is absolutely made. Like he has everything. He could live his entire life like however the hell he wants. And yet he just goes and risks it all on the next thing. That's really what he wants to do at this time. But
exactly,
you do not have to be that person in the 21st century to live a life on your own terms. You don't. No. Absolutely don't. Everything's got a lot easier. You don't have to take the huge amounts of risk anymore, capital wise. You don't have to spend unbelievable amounts of time and hiring in-house employees. A lot of things can be outsourced now. Everything's just a lot slicker. Technology has made it possible to do things cheaper, faster, and from anywhere. And that's opened up a whole new range of opportunities. I think that 100 years ago, I don't know what I would be doing on this earth. I dread to think the thing is that companies like EE didn't exist back then either, though. So, those companies have got ever more burdensome over time as well. I've seen that process happening. I've seen the process of bureaucracy being added layer by layer, like every month, as things just get like maybe 0.5% harder. And over the course of a year, to deliver the same value, and that's the key here, to deliver the same value will maybe be 5-10%, maybe 20% harder.
Yeah,
because what else are they going to do with their time? We've got to find something for these people to do, right? So I think that for me, it's like a balance between exerting your value fully on one end of the spectrum versus having a safety net on the other. And whilst everyone, no man is an island, and everyone needs people around them to make things work, I think the freer you become of a big burdensome corporate safety net, the more you can allow your individual value to flourish and to come out, because you're not hindered by that process of like life inflation, right? The bureaucracy that's laid in over time.
Yeah.
So I think that to some degree, coming full circle here, yes, I believe there are fundamental personality differences. Some people just need that structure; they need it, to the nth degree. But I also think that most, if not all, people have it in them to grow to the point where they can actually take that leap and do something on their own. People who, I mean, you see this all the time. People who thought they never could do that have gone and done it all over the place.
Oh yeah.
And maybe there are some who just can't, right? But I think it comes down to, a degree of, like I said earlier, the entrepreneurs who have that just amazing ability to tolerate risk. You don't have to be 10 out of 10 on that scale, but even if you're a 3 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10, you've still got enough to go and make something happen in today's world. In my opinion, that's my view. So that kind of somewhat attenuates the value of education as we know it.
Yes, to some degree. But the one thing I do want to say, I'm not someone who just completely, I try and be fairly objective about education. Now, there are clearly some very negative aspects when we look at it's not keeping up with modern day trends. It's not necessarily preparing people for work. But what it does do is now remember, we often talk about education and looking at kind of exam results and the way people are assessed. But what it does do is it does enable people to really integrate socially. If you think about schools and colleges and universities, they are fantastic kind of arenas, if you like, to learn about EQ, if you like a lot of how to kind of form social groups and interact with other social circles and kind of find your niche. And so I think there is still some value in terms of what it offers, but in terms of if you just if your thing is to come out and be prepared for this economic environment today, it doesn't do that. It fails miserably. Because you let's face it, you don't develop the skill sets, you don't really get any form of autonomy. The only autonomy I got was when I did my PhD, and that actually was the most valuable part of the whole education I went through. Because I learned to manage my own time. Everything was done on my own kind of schedule, and interestingly enough, it was the hardest I ever worked as well, and it never felt like work. And that is what I think people want to seek. They want to seek a position in life where they're doing work which, yes, contributes, but they feel like they're in flow most of the time. It doesn't really feel like work, but they are contributing.
Right. So what would you argue should be the purpose of education? What is its final goal? And so sort of double question. And what do you think its real purpose is in terms of what it actually achieves?
Yeah, now you see, again, I do think it still provides, like I was saying to you the other day when we were talking. So I was saying about the idea that what underpins all of my knowledge is kind of the fundamental principles of science and some other things that you do get to some degree from education. I think the purpose, though, should really be helping a young person to identify, different avenues for where they might be able to add value in society. I think that there are certain people who this system is not set up for, and they should be getting out of this system as soon as they can, or they should at least be given the opportunity to have an alternative, a more practical alternative. Because it is, as I say, like fundamentally, it is that the whole system is run and set up by like-minded people who are academics. These aren't people who really. Some of these academics will have never experienced anything other than working within the education system, either as a student or as a researcher, or and so it makes sense that it's going to suit people who want to do that but not necessarily the other vast array of kind of career paths and choices out there. And so,
yeah, really interesting, because I think for anything to function properly, you have to first agree on what you're trying to achieve with it, right? It sounds pretty straightforward when you say it like that. And I think we've lost that a long time ago with education. I don't think we even know why we're doing it anymore. But
no.
I mean, your purpose, I would have actually given a different answer. So you said helping young people to add value or learn how to add value.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would agree with that. But I would have looked at it from the other direction and said it's to help people find fulfillment. Ultimately, to give them the tools to achieve fulfillment.
Yeah.
But then again, unless everyone's adding some degree of value, that can't be achieved. So I think that it's the kind of the same. It's like the same thing from different angles. I think that some of the most important things in life are adding value, personal growth, and having meaningful experiences. I mean, try and think of anything that matters that falls outside of those three things, right?
Right.
And so you kind of zoomed in on one of them. I would probably encompass all three.
Yeah.
And it's give people the tools to do all three. So we can agree on that as a purpose, but what do you think it's really achieving under the hood?
I mean, yeah, like it's under the hood. I don't think it's achieving. Well, I don't even know what the objective is really a lot of the time, other than, and I will be slightly controversial and probably say, well, maybe not controversial, but I work in this.
We love controversy.
Yeah, and I will say, let's face it, a lot of universities, since the fee rises have come in, a lot of these institutes are making a lot of money. And so what is the objective? The objective in most industries is to make money. And I'm not so sure that it suits, I'm not so sure the objective is to focus entirely on the best outcome for the individual. And I'm not saying that's necessarily been designed to happen on purpose, but it's a big, slow machine. If you think about the education as one kind of entity, it's a big, slow machine. And if you look at technology and the way the world is moving, it's fast, it's rapid. Evolution is evolving at an ever faster rate. And that big, slow machine that is currently the education system is successful at making money, particularly in higher education. I think I saw something the other day where I think Oxford and Cambridge combined own more assets and real estate in the UK and the Church of England. So they own things like I think Cambridge owns like the O2, but anyway, I mean, even outside of those very elite institutions, who probably can justify, by the way, the very high fees. It's when you see, like, I used to live in Shrewsbury, and Shrewsbury built a university and charged the same fees as Oxford. Now, why did they do that? Can they justify that? Is a degree from Shrewsbury University going to be the equivalent of a degree from Oxford? I don't know. University at that stage, university is still a brand. Okay, there are aspects of branding. If you have a certain brand of university, it can still hold some value. But it depends on what level of education you're really talking about, because secondary, primary, like higher, they should have different objectives at different levels, depending on the development of the other adolescents or the young adults. But I don't feel that they do, personally.
So if we zoom in on the higher education, so yeah, you could argue how could the incentive to make money, how could that not impact their behavior as a business? They're a business, right?
Right.
Even when I went, I just remember how pervasively kind of just accepted it was. Like you're going to university.
Yeah.
That exactly. they would take us all into a hall. I remember when I was at school, they took us all into a hall. They got some lady, and I think she was from the student loans company, and I remember she was putting on this PowerPoint presentation. Like, look, when you're making $4,000 a month, you're only paying £600 a month towards your. And we thought, wow, that's amazing! Like this is going to cost us hardly anything.
Right.
And it was just such a easy, just so easy just to say yes. It's just so easy just to go, yeah, university, yes. And back then, we had just basically none of the apparatus we needed to make a good decision. on that. It was all social proof, right? There was a bit of scarcity in there. There was
Yes.
all the Cialdini metrics, likability, right? She was a very, very likable lady, came in, sold us this prospect of education. And the teachers, not, obviously just all kind of funneled us down this route. And looking back, I mean, okay, so to offer my piece, do I regret going to university? Yeah. Don't get me wrong, it was great. I had a fantastic time. It was an awesome 3 years. Was it worth it? Hell fucking no. There's no way.
Exactly.
There's no way that was like a good choice for I should have just started what I'm doing now, not 3 years earlier, 9 years earlier. Yeah, it's as simple as that. I don't use it now. I did use it in a job for a couple of years, but it was a shit job. So, what was the point of that? So, at least for me, it wasn't for me, and it was the closest thing to what I studied at university. I was probably using more of my degree than any of my previous classmates that I knew of.
Look, I think the thing is, it's so kind of endemic in the way people think. I mean, I tutor a lot and coach a lot of students from fairly high net worth individuals, and there's no kind of even thought about, okay, what is the alternative really? It's the thinking is on, okay, what A levels do I need to get into what university? There's no the thought process doesn't involve any additional decision. And so as a young person, that is the route you're filtered down.
It's tricky for you, isn't it? Because you have a responsibility to educate them, but also to coach them. So I mean, Scott, guys, he's like the SAS of young people coaches, right? Like, people hire Scott, people on like the board of like Citibank and people, they get Scott to come and like coach their kids, get them through there with flying colours. But of course, Scott, with your value system as well, I know that you want what's best for these young people as well, and you have to make sure that not only do you deliver, but also that you set it on the right path that's right for them. How do you navigate that?
It's a really, really difficult process, because sometimes I am torn. Sometimes I can clearly see that the primary objective is to get this person to get a young individual into, let's just say, the best university that they can. But from my own experience and perspective, I can see that actually they're maybe not well suited to be going down that route, and they potentially have other skill sets which would be better utilized and potentially make them more kind of fulfilled going in a different direction. But I think from my perspective, I just try and increase awareness. You can't tell people what to do, but at least if you provide some aspect of awareness about the alternatives, maybe increase their own kind of self-awareness to some degree, then it might get them thinking. They might start doing a little bit of research, of their own, and thinking, okay, is there another path I can take here? And by the way, this is not me. If I can see that someone is very, very well suited to be going down an academic path, then that is what I would absolutely 100% encourage. Because, even for me, I'm very well suited to academia. I love studying, but even I had to get out of that system and focus my study kind of on other things. So it is interesting. But it is definitely increasing awareness that. But within that, other companies, if you're, say you're trying to build a modern day company, it needs to come from that side as well, because there need to be things in place where you don't just say, okay, well, our requirement is a 2-1 degree, because everyone's going to 80% of all students are going to come out of university with a 2-1 degree or whatever. Like, it doesn't differentiate anyone. How are you going to know you're going to get the best fit for your particular kind of company or organization? So it needs to come from the top as well. It can't just come from the bottom. So
it might matter if the skills learned were vocational and hands-on, like in the university actually gave you the tools, the toolkit you needed to be able to deliver the value. but often it doesn't do that. That's the thing. It's more of a, it's almost like, at least my degree was like one very elaborate, very enjoyable paper exercise, box ticking exercise.
Right.
Like, okay, great. So Max now understands how ocean currents move. Did I ever want to become an oceanographer? No, and it's partly on me.
No.
Why was I studying oceanography? In fact, why was 99% of the people studying it doing that?
Right. Fundamentally, it comes down to the skill of being able to learn quickly is far more valuable and transferable than having that little bit of knowledge about oceanography, right? If you can learn quickly and you're taught how to learn in a very efficient, effective way, then that skill you can apply to, it doesn't matter what the subject is. It doesn't matter, because you can do it in a very efficient, very effective and fast way.
I think that's a really important point, because that's something transferable, arguably, that university does deliver. But do you think it does that better than 3 years spent in a job could deliver?
No.
Right.
No, I don't, because I think if you look at degrees are actually increasing in numbers if you look at them, and as you say, there are more and more of these degrees like liberal arts and things where they're, even the cognitive sciences, where they're kind of pulling lots of bits into a degree to kind of make it a little bit more diverse. But again, no, I think almost all of the kind of more esoteric learning and all of the knowledge development should be done in a position. I think what education should be doing is developing skills like, okay, how do you learn? How do you make effective decisions? How do you set goals for yourself? How do you develop personally as an individual? All of these things which are have far more kind of overall value to you than learning now, there are some aspects of knowledge which are important, but they could be learned they don't need 16 years of education. The fundamentals of science, the fundamentals of English grammar and English literature, they could be learned. They don't take 16 years to get to grips with. Once you've learned the fundamentals, then that builds the foundation for everything else that comes.
Well, you touched on something I think really important earlier when you said you try to help your students increase in self-awareness. Right. And that is something that sort of gaping hole in the education system, is teaching people how to become self-aware, or helping people to become self-aware. You can't make someone self-aware by default, but you can give them the tools perhaps to help them enable themselves to become more self-aware. And I'd like to ask you how you go about helping young people become more self-aware. Do you have any tools or techniques?
Yes. Well, actually, I spent some time getting trained, shall we say, or getting qualified to deliver psychometric assessments on both ability and personality, and so I do use some of that on, if the parent is very open to it and if the student is very responsive to it. Before I start work with someone, I typically get them to do a few assessments, just so, firstly, to help me as a coach to see, okay, what kind of attributes, what kind of temperaments does this individual have, both in terms of a personality and in terms of, in terms of their current level of ability. And developing skills is different to ability. Let's face it, like, some people have certain aptitudes for certain things. That doesn't mean you can't improve a particular skill, but there are people who have shining aptitudes in certain areas, and that sometimes depends on their personalities. So as long as their parents are fairly open to it, and as long as the student is keen on doing it, then I will often deliver a couple of psychometric assessments. Because again, it's like, so say you go to, the way I see it is, say you're going to a personal trainer or a doctor. Everything is personalized, right? Well, we're getting more into personalized medicine. But say you go to a personal trainer, they're going to want to monitor your heart rate, know your current level of fitness, know what your training history's been, know what nutrition plan you're on. The same when you go to the doctor, they're not going to diagnose you with anything until they've done some tests. And so with education, the same thing should be done. Okay, let's get the fundamental kind of, let's get to as much information as we can about this individual, and then we can work from there, rather than say, okay, let's just follow a one size fits all approach to kind of learning and development. It's kind of crazy.
It feels almost like it's been constructed that way on purpose. In fact, I think it probably has, back from when it was invented. Factory farming of young people into cookie cutter paper pushers, right? In fact, the whole idea is to make an army of conformists.
Yes.
Especially up until, say, like, school leaving, so like 16, 18, A-levels, certainly before you go to university. The whole thing is geared around obedience, compliance.
Yes.
Not speaking up.
Yes. And
not adding original ideas.
And when that works best, when people are young, because when people are young, I think up until the age of, I saw a lecture the other day from Bruce Lipton, and he actually was saying about, up until about the age of 7 or 8, young people have a lower kind of brain frequency in terms of their vibration, and it's not even vibrating at a conscious level. In other words, they learn through hypnosis when they're young, to a certain point. Yeah, because the conscious part of your brain hasn't developed yet, and if the kind of cortex region, it's the last part to develop, really, and that's in kind of, and so you're learning that a funny thing that was told to me the other day, actually, or I saw somewhere. The first 2 or 3 years of a baby's life, right? What do they learn? They learn how to walk and talk, followed by the next 10 years where they're told to sit down and shut up.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that somewhere. I can't remember who said it, but I've definitely. Yeah. That's golden, isn't it?
It's great, isn't it?
I feel like it's tragic, personally. I think I just don't know where it can go from here, because we're at this strange point where I think knowledge of this is growing. How could it not?
Yeah.
People are becoming aware of the fact that the education system is so shortfall in its role, helping people to add value, helping people to grow, helping people to pursue meaningful experiences, all those things we mentioned. It does not teach self-awareness. It does not teach critical thinking. It does not teach financial education. Funny that. Now, why would that be?
Exactly.
So
the most important skill you can probably develop, one of them in this world.
And yet, to change something like that, to turn the ship around, could take decades, right? Is it just gonna? What's going to happen? I don't think anything can happen suddenly. I don't think revolution is necessarily a good idea, right? But if you were to
trying it with things like
the MOOCs.
So they're trying with the online, the education online courses, Udemy, Coursera. They're trying to change the status quo to some degree in terms of self-learning. I don't know. Can you
that's all very like you have to opt into that. It's voluntary. It's usually older people that then go and do that. And like we said at the very start, Scott and I are obsessed with education. We spend a large part of our day sharpening the saw, trying to improve ourselves, make ourselves more valuable on one hand, learn something new and useful, make ourselves happier, more fulfilled. And yet here we are critiquing the fuck out of the old school education system, right? It's not education per se that's the problem. It's what it's actually doing. It's the way it's done, and it's the end goal of it, which I think is a far cry from what it should be. If the aim is to make a better society for everyone, a freer society where people can deliver more value to start with, right? If productivity is what you value, then there's on that basis alone, there's probably no reason why you should endorse the current system. I believe, but there are exceptions, and I believe that there's definitely a place for it, especially if what you want to do is quite clearly mapped out. Say you want to be an architect, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer. and you're very clear and very certain about where you want to go, then education is absolutely great. You need to know you need to understand medicine to be a doctor. There's just no way of getting around that.
Yeah.
And it seems to deliver that pretty well. The challenge is when you dilute that, people don't know what they want because they don't have the self-awareness and they don't have the critical thinking because we haven't given it to them. We haven't given them the tools. We assume that because they're kids, they don't know, that they couldn't possibly know what to do with that in order to give it to them. I think it's the other way around. I think they're kids because we haven't given them the know-how. I think it's completely the other way around. I think if we're able to access this a little bit earlier in life, give people what's missing, help them understand themselves better and what would truly make them fulfilled. Yes, you learn by doing, but God, a little bit of a steer in the right direction is worth its weight in gold. So, understanding who you are at your core, what is your personality, what is your temperament, how do you see the world, how do you make decisions, how do you like to structure yourself? I didn't learn this stuff until I was in my early 20s, and so it's completely changed my direction. But can you imagine, sorry, go on, after you.
No, I was going to say, sorry but can you imagine? I mean, as you mentioned, that we're quite deep thinkers, but by any, in any person's context, and yet we were both put off learning for some years post secondary education, which is, if we're put off, I see what it does to some people.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine what it would look like if it was built again from the ground up with a completely different end goal in mind? I mean, it would be very tricky, right? You'd have to think about, okay, certain subjects maybe you would classify by personality type. Maybe some people learn better this way, some people learn better that way. Then how do you find teachers for each one? And then what subjects do you organise by ability? Because right now, I remember I had 5 German tiers in my school, right? 5 different classes depending on ability. And then which subject should be generic? What do we need everyone's? The thing is, as soon as you try and, it sounds great in theory, but as soon as you try and go out there and build something like this, there's just so many different agendas. Everyone's got their own idea of what's better. And sometimes that's based on the end goal. Sometimes that's based on their own personal political agenda or some sort of subjective agenda. So it's near on impossible to make something that's perfect. And, maybe we shouldn't strive for perfect, but I think we could do a lot better than we're doing at the moment. So I'm just a talking point. I'm just interested to ponder where it could go in 10 years. And I don't see enough pressure mounting for it to change in a huge way, at least in 10 years. But I do see a lot more people taking matters into their own hands. And hopefully at a younger and younger age, I think that's what people like you can actually go out there and encourage, which is, it's great that you're doing that.
Yeah, I've actually been, one of the things I've been surprised about, is the lack of interest in technology integration, actually, and even by the young people. It's really quite interesting. I found it one of the fact I work with all of these young people who have been brought up in this. They obviously they love their technology in terms of away from education, but most people still prefer, most of the kind of the students I work with still prefer, the hard copy textbooks, for example, than the digital resources. And a lot of them still prefer kind of tutors and traditional teaching than they do video learning, which surprises me, actually.
Right.
I have to say, it surprises me because I love learning off of video and kind of, whatever it may be, Coursera, YouTube. But actually, I don't find that a lot of people have tried to introduce this idea of flip learning, where people go and watch videos, because let's face it, if you want to learn something, the information, you don't need to wait for YouTube. Right. You just don't need to turn up to class to learn, how to do trigonometry. You could just sit there one evening and learn it on YouTube. I don't want to put myself out of business as a tutor, but a tutor shouldn't be paid to just deliver a subject back to someone, because again, the information is there for free online. You may as well
totally. Oh man, I can probably go and learn everything I learned in my degree on YouTube now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
100%.
okay, to be fair, there was a lot of very interesting, absolutely up-to-date research that was relayed to us that was pretty fascinating, but it's incredible what you can learn just on YouTube these days, let alone through paid online courses. The quantity and quality of information out there is amazing. Well, if ever I want to learn something, I just YouTube podcasts. I will take a weekend, I'll binge listen, binge watch. That's how I've been able to level up in things, whether it's my e-commerce business. I remember kicking that off with just 3 days pretty much of just solid cramming. And that was my foundation. Right. And then I kept it going. And I'd say like go for a walk in the morning and just listen to a podcast each morning. And just I built a business out of it.
And a very, very successful business.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's doing all right, but thank you very much.
Well, a lot of people would love to have your lifestyle in terms of, the freedom it gives you, and as you say, you've done that not through a traditional education path. You've done it through take it on your own back to go and learn stuff.
And it's so, okay, this is a really important point I wanted to make, which is that when you work for yourself, so I often talk about the 2 golden rules of freedom, right?
Yeah.
Which are very simply maximizing uptime, minimizing downtime. Right? So when you're working, you're building an asset, you're not merely trading time for money, ideally, right? You are abiding by things like Parkinson's law. Why take 3 hours to do something that you can do in 10 minutes? You can make something 99% perfect in an hour, or you can make it 96% perfect in 5 minutes. Like,
right.
I'd rather spend an hour doing 12 of those, right, than 1 at 99. And this is we're natural perfectionists. We are trained to be perfectionists at school. It's not helpful because you deliver a lot more by just getting shit done, just doing it quickly. If it's not perfect, like, this podcast, I'm just going to chuck this out there. It's a bit, rough and ready, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I can spend a day editing it, like clipping bits and chopping bits off, but I'd rather just get it out and do something else this afternoon, right? Whether that's something productive. I've got plenty of work to do this afternoon, but it might be, going to the gym a bit earlier, seeing my brother, right, or just hanging out with a friend somewhere. So these are all things we need to do as part of life. We can't just allow work to inflate to fill the time so that we can take things from 96 to 98% perfect. No. So that's the first one. Parkinson's law is a big part of that, and also focusing on what's important. 80-20.
But when did you learn those? When did you learn Parkinson's law and Pareto's principle? Did you learn it at school?
Well, no. So, I mean, obviously, I didn't learn it at school, but
why not?
Yeah, exactly. Because that wasn't what they were trying to. They were not trying to create a productive and fulfilled member of society. They were trying to create a compliant member of society.
Okay.
Who does things to spec.
Yeah.
To spec. Right. That's the key. I'm not. It's not about doing things to spec. You don't get anywhere making things to spec. That shit is Victorian. Right. Okay. If you're working in a cloth factory, fine. We're a bit beyond that now. Mm. Anyone can do things to spec. Anyone can. There isn't much room for efficiency left to do things faster or cheaper. Faster and cheaper isn't the way to get ahead in the modern world. The way to get ahead is to do something different, original, interesting, to offer some kind of value that is authentic that other people can't necessarily deliver because they're not you.
Yeah. I think many aspects of kind of Darwinism would suggest that actually that has always been really the real thing. Evolution and looking for new niches has always been the way to go, really.
I suppose for
thrive.
I think for a large part of modern history, it just so happened that the niche was faster and bigger and cheaper.
Agreed.
And that niche has been, it's pretty hard to compete on price with anything these days. The problem with, Seth Godin says, the problem with entering into a race to the bottom is that you might win, right? Or worse, you might come second.
Yeah, exactly. Nah, that it's some of the Seth Godin perceptions are brilliantly put together, and I love all of the books that guy does,
Yeah.
because it just, you see things in a slightly different way. Anyone who gets you to look at things in a different way. In fact, one of the things I often show my students before anything else, in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, they have the picture of the portrait of the lady, and you can see an old lady or a young lady depending on your kind of perception, the way you look at the picture.
I know the picture. So there's a classic book, guys, by Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I haven't actually read the hard copy. I've just listened to it.
Interesting.
But I know the image that you mean. Yeah.
Yes.
And it can look like a young woman with her head turned, or an old lady, depending on what you're expecting to see, pretty much. Very strange. But the mind is full of tricks like that.
Yeah, and the realization when I show a lot of kind of young people this, and the realization that you can look at something which is effectively the same thing in a completely different way, is I think quite profound to a lot of them.
Literally looking at something 2 different ways, depending on what your brain is doing.
And this, also, sorry, mate. After you.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, how this applies to what we're saying is that I feel that. I mean, by all means, disagree with me here, but I think that education dampens our ability to spot opportunities. It conditions us to not see those opportunities, and as soon as you switch yourself onto them, suddenly they're everywhere.
Right.
And you think there's 100 businesses I could start. It's not a question of having ideas. It's which one am I actually going to start? Which one can I execute on properly?
Right.
And then you have some minor success, and then you think, okay, you start relating new opportunities to like this. But like that last time when I did that product, all I've got to do is buy this many units and market it like this, and an opportunity. So your perception of the world changes completely as soon as you start. As soon as you activate this trigger, and I think everyone has it, but it just has to be switched on. I think my view is that I think we're naturally entrepreneurs. I really do. To varying degrees.
Very creative.
Yeah.
I think it was Brian Tracy suggested. I don't know where he got this study from, so I can't quote the original study. But there was some study done which suggested that 95% of young people, I think they were age 5 or they're very young age, showed genius levels of creativity. And when they reassessed or re-examined those same people, and again, I don't know how the test was kind of standardized and everything, but they reassessed the same group of people when they were 21, and I think only something like 3 to 5% had kept.
Jesus Christ!
Yeah.
Really? That's
Is
it? So was that by Brian Tracy? You said.
Yeah, Brian Tracy. It was a really interesting study that he had kind of highlighted, and it just really highlighted that a lot of the education system actually it has a very kind of deleterious effect on people's ability to think creatively and to think independently and to be open to experience. There's obviously that one of the big 5 traits is openness to new experience.
Yeah.
So some people may have that naturally, like you were saying, you learn to question things and see things, try and see things from a very objective kind of perspective before. But a lot of people don't have, and a lot of people lose that, and I think that's one of the biggest.
Yeah, that's really. I mean, I wouldn't want to necessarily like say, oh yeah, wow, that's shocking, without knowing what the study was and how they had that.
Exactly.
But I mean, you're not one for quoting shaky studies, Scott. So, but either way, I think we can probably safely presume that. I mean, even my mother and my sister are both teachers, and they acknowledge this in their work. They do what they can within a faulty framework,
right.
But they are very vocal about the fact that we are, as very creative ladies themselves, very vocal about the fact that we are dampening the kids' creativity. We're not giving them enough room to breathe and let them express themselves.
Yeah.
Too much rule following. Yeah.
And I'm guessing in this context, because creativity can be quite subjective in terms of what it means. But I'm looking at it as the original thought processes. So the ability to do something that would be considered potentially fairly innovative, or something slightly different from standardized kind of norms, if you like.
Yeah.
Because I guess, I mean, how do you measure creativity? And that's one of the things I asked when I saw this particular, this particular study. But yeah, it was interesting. I mean, you can definitely see why that would be the case.
Well, doing things to spec does not require original thought. So,
right.
Yeah. So I was touched on earlier about what I said to be the 2 golden rules of freedom. So you obviously got the maximizing uptime, which I discussed, and then the minimizing of downtime, which is not spending time on things that just don't need to be done. Always bearing in mind what is the point of the exercise, and it's like the bureaucracy idea I talked about earlier. A lot of time is spent in these environments doing things that just simply don't actually produce anything. They're just sort of following various processes. It's like the layers and layers are built up over time as a way to give people stuff to do. Because look, I'm a huge fan of process. I'm a huge fan of things that make things more efficient and easier, faster, cheaper, perhaps. And so that's one possible function of process: educational process, corporate process. But there's also an alternative, right? And best summarized as giving otherwise idle people something to do with their time. Because a lot of people don't have any idea what they want to do with their time. I didn't, right, for a long time. So what do you do when you don't know what you want to do with your time? What do you do? Well, you give yourself something to do.
Yeah.
And I wish that processes such as those employed by schools, universities, and corporate organizations were there to improve efficiency, increase output, do things better, faster, cheaper. But the reality of how these processes come about, because who's inventing them? It's not the benevolent, principal who just wants what's best for everyone. No, it's the people in the middle. It's the people who have a job, who are employed, who want to keep that job because they don't know that if you sell something on Amazon, then you can go and do that from the beach in Bali. They haven't thought about it. I wasn't thinking about it until I read the 4-Hour Work Week, right? Which,
of course,
as trite as that sounds to say, like that was the moment at which I was like, what? something changed. Yeah.
Same. That for me was the book pre SFF, where we met at the digital marketing.
Yeah.
That to me was the catalyst for that.
Yeah. Cool. And we're not the only ones. So thank you, Tim Ferriss.
Well, Rich Dad's done the same thing. Doesn't it? In terms of
Robert Kiyosaki. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in a way, who can blame them? If they're not being sort of willingly blind, at least if they haven't got the inspiration, then they're just going to create something to do with their time, and also, fortunately, for other people to do as well. And so you can kind of understand how this process comes about. And so this is what I mean about minimizing downtime, not doing stuff like that.
And also seeing it as a bit of a game, I think the one thing I see within the education system, I would like to see it be less kind of structured and formal, and more like, a lot of people I think who, let's just say, win a life, see it a bit like you were talking about Elon Musk earlier. I think they see it more as a game. Let's experiment with a few things. Let's just do some things, see where it leads, and let's not take anything kind of too seriously in terms of but let's treat, and a lot of people have said that about money as well, yes, treat it with respect, but treat it like a game,
Absolutely.
You win things, you lose things. And I think the idea of being okay to experiment, again, that's another thing which is kind of not something which is necessarily encouraged or developed, I would say, at young stages. It's usually you try and avoid being wrong, and you try and aim or seek to be right in every, and that's just not sustainable. It's not a good way to approach anything, really, is it? I mean,
it's funny when you mentioned I was having this thought just earlier, actually, as I was brainstorming for this call of ours today, and I had this weird thought. I thought, if life was a game, literally, like if we were playing the game of life on some computer somewhere, I think the results would be very different. If people just on some level just kind of detach themselves, whenever you play a game, I don't really play games anymore, but you've got some people are worth 80 billion, right? And some people are Yeah, some people like Jeff Bezos, what's he worth now? 150 billion. I don't know.
Something like that.
And then,
Yeah.
and some people are making 30k a year, and
Right.
you kind of think like, you mean, okay, let's just keep it reasonable. This guy's making $1 million a year. What? Do you think you can't make 200,000?
Yeah.
Like, why? Why can't you? Right? Why not? Tell me. Give me the reasons why. There aren't any. Like, if they can do it, then why can't you? Right? So, I think that a lot of it comes down to, and it's another really key area where education doesn't deliver. And in fact, it's very hard as a human to do this. But I think that stepping out of yourself in a way, uh, we tend to play defensive because our egos run wild. And if you have the ability to just sort of let go a little bit and see things as a game, realize that whatever happens, you're kind of going to be okay. You know, if you take some big chances, what's the worst thing that can happen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, go back to your old job. Right? You go live with your parents. Oh, why that sucks? Why does that suck? Because you've got some storyline, you know, in your head about yourself, yourself as an individual, your identity, your ego. And I think people like Elon Musk, entrepreneurs at all levels, I think they find it easy to let go of that a little bit. I really do. I think they just, and that's definitely something that can be cultivated through certain techniques, meditation and mindfulness. But I will just say that I feel that education and corporate environments do the opposite. I really think they try and instill an ego. I think they want you to feel pain. You know, that's the impression I got right through to the job. In fact, if anything worse at the job, they want you to feel pain. They want you to be egoic. They want you to be egotistical because then they can control you.
Yeah. And a lot of it is that, isn't it? They know, I mean, look, human nature, fear is a bigger driver than reward. And unless you're really prepared to put the work in to override that, then unfortunately a lot of people, or most people, will be slightly more influenced by fear than reward. And if you see it as a game, I think those two fields level up a bit more, like you were saying. It's interesting, you know, that you say that, though, just kind of getting back to education, because one thing, I traveled to Singapore this year, and I noticed that the education budgets in places like China and Singapore, they're still pouring lots and lots of money into education. So I think for China, it was over like $1 trillion is getting poured into the Chinese education system. How do you think that compares to the education system in the United Kingdom in terms of the money being put in or taken out?
In Singapore, China.
Let's say China. So China, there's a lot of money filtered into their education system. A lot of
Well, given that the average GDP is less, I'd probably say it's less, but per person.
Yeah. We're cutting education budgets still, and so what's happening is we're taking from ours, and they're supplying to theirs. I mean, you get a lot of cultural differences between the two. So, for example, we're very instructional with our teaching. We still learn a lot by rote memorization, all of these things, whereas they will focus more on, okay, here's a problem, go and learn how to solve it. So while you get those culture differences, but it's just interesting to me that we're trying to see what we can extract from our education system, whereas they're trying to stimulate theirs. That at least that's the way I see it. Now, you know, I don't have a huge kind of I'm not hugely researched on the politics punnies, but I do know that in terms of the education budgets, there's a lot of two very different things going on.
They're ramping it up.
Yeah, and also I know that in Singapore they do a lot of like the psychometric assessments for their very young. I know that, you know, they definitely take a more holistic approach to dealing with their young people and how to educate them. And I think we could actually learn a lot from that, from what from my perspective, from what I saw.
Their kids are at school for 12 hours a day though.
Yeah,
as well. I mean, so they still have that element of the stick approach, I think.
Right. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's important to not be not always see the grass as greener. But I think what we're trying to really highlight here with the education aspect is, look, there still are parts which do offer some value. We don't don't always want to be like, I see it over and over again. People just like being very, very highly super critical of the education system. And we've just discussed as to why, you know, a lot of that has some merit, but just consistent criticism without any offering any solutions is kind of, it's not very kind of productive and proactive, is it? I mean, it's just, you know, it should be more about figuring out ways and discussing ways by which we can, because look, these young people have to go through this system at the moment. It's the way, it's what parents, you know, are, they really have, unless they want to homeschool, they have, which some do, but most are professionals. So they have no option than to put their children into schools.
Let's pick up there then, because let's move into sort of like, well, what can we do about it then, and what's going to happen? So I think in all realism, the system's not going to change tomorrow, right? And if it did, it'd probably be so chaotic that it'd probably be, if anything, just destructive and worse, if anything. You know, it's not, I don't think a revolution is necessarily healthy, but I think two ways in which I could see it changing relatively easily. I think, first of all, it's okay not to go to university, and it's okay not to go even into college, into A levels. And I think that we need to, if nothing else changed, you know, at least let's start being more pragmatic and more honest about the use of university, high level education. And so that's the first one. And also the other side of the coin to that, another way in which, the second way in which I see it could change, is that if it was to just focus a little bit more on self-discovery of young people, so that they can then do with that information what they will, so that they can then actually make appropriate choices for themselves. Okay, well, do I want to go to university? Is medicine right for me? Well, maybe not, because maybe I'm in Myers-Briggs terms, maybe I'm an INTP, for example. Maybe I can't stand meeting with person after person after person all day in such a structured, rigid way. Maybe I don't have much of a mind for details, and maybe I don't, as much as I care about people, maybe I find it hard to sort of, engage them heart to heart, one after the other. Like, that could be exhausting for someone like that. And yet it's quite conceivable that someone like that could just go and just be a doctor. You make loads of money, just do it. Yeah, I care about people. Yeah, sure. Surely I've got everything I need. I'm intelligent. I care about people. What more do I need to be a doctor, right? Well, I wish it was that simple.
Same thing applies to teachers, mate. Same thing applies to teachers, right? Often teachers will there are some amazing teachers. Let me just say that first. But honestly, there are some teachers who found a subject potentially they enjoyed the subject, potentially found it, very kind of, they had an aptitude for it, and they fell into teaching because it's something they could do very well. But maybe they don't particularly like working with young people. Maybe they don't really care that much about the development of the young person. They care more about just trying to teach the subject they enjoy and know very well. I think you've got to have both. And I see that a lot. Like, not a lot. I think most teachers have the student's best interest at heart. I think you would need to be able, because it's a difficult job to do. But I would like to see some variation within kind of the educators. I mean, imagine, right? So Bill Gates now is doing a lot of philanthropy. Okay, imagine if Bill Gates turns up at your school to give a talk or to give a session. He's done what he's done. He's got this whole perspective. How exciting would that be? Now I know he turns up to places like Harvard to give talks on, but what I mean is, like, it's very difficult when you're being taught by a teacher who you, as you rightly say, is just teaching a specification. They don't necessarily have any coaching experience or experience in psychometrics. And if they do, they probably don't have the time or the inclination to do it, because, of course, their hand is being well, they're kind of being directed to some degrees. Let's face it. What is the currency of schools? What attracts people? Grades, like getting people into certain universities. And until any of that gets addressed, but who the educators are, what the outcomes, are for the students, and then what is the currency? What is your metric for success? And it can't just be a bunch of A stars and 5 students into Oxbridge, because unfortunately that's what it is. Now it's slightly different at universities, because let's face it, if you do go to Oxford or Cambridge, their currency is, okay, we want to have a very, very strong alumni, right? So they are going to want to attract talented people. Because their currency is, it's not, okay, how many people get 2-1s as such, but it's, do we have some really highly credible alumni? You look at some of the Oxbridge alumni, they speak volumes. And so, but unfortunately at secondary education, where I think the really important stuff happens, the currency is grades, and when I say the currency, the objective is as higher grades as physically possible in exams, and as many students as possible into elite universities. It's not, let's see if we can get this student into an apprenticeship over here, or some kind of work experience, or let's train them to be young entrepreneurs.
Every party in this game has their own motives and genders, and I think it's just important to be very open about all this. I think part of addressing this whole issue is about giving people the toolkit to be more self-aware, and to encourage them to play the game in a way that's going to maximize their personal well-being and their ability to contribute to other people. Unfortunately, what we have at the moment is just basically shuttling people down the system almost without any thought, and they just go along with it because at the time, they're 16, 17, 18 years old, and they don't know, because they've not been given the tools. And that's the thing. I think we assume that they wouldn't know what to do with the tools if we gave them to them. Well, I would say it's actually the other way around. I think the reason they don't know, the reason they're young, is because they haven't got the tools. It's only when they go out into the world and get battered about a bit and discover their stuff that they think, oh shit, I'm 24, I'm in a job I don't like, and I need to do something. Oh, what's this? 4-hour work week? It sounds interesting. All right, so
I also think as well, again, Jeff Bezos talks about being completely customer focused, customer centric. Honestly, do you really think the education system is entirely student centric? Entirely?
No.
No, it's got to be that's. I know that might be a slightly idealistic way of looking at things, but look, if Jeff Bezos can build this e-commerce platform which serves just about every buyer in the world and is completely consumer focused, customer focused, then I think the education system actually could take a big leap from that. I really do. Now, again, I'm not saying some teachers aren't completely student focused. They may be, but I don't think the system is set up to be that. Now, who's the customer? The customer is, in this case, if we're talking about it as a business, the customer is the student. So you've got to be student centric. They're the people who this is set up to serve. And we've just suggested, and during this whole podcast, it's not serving the majority very well.
I think that's a key point there. Who is the customer? I think up until a certain age, arguably the student is not the customer.
Right. Okay. Right. You're suggesting the parent is?
I don't know if it's any one individual. I guess just society as a whole. But society is largely dominated by, powerful corporate organisations in lobbies of government. So it's really ultimately helping those guys. I'm not saying there's a sinister kind of conspiracy going on, but I think through various complex mechanisms and incentives, that is kind of what's trickling through, or has been. But I think that's falling apart. But at least for the last 50 years, 100 years, who is benefiting from this?
Yeah, but it should. What my suggestion would be, look, I see parents who spend tens and tens of thousands of pounds a year
Mm.
On private education, and in addition to that, tutors, and in addition to that,
Yeah.
and and then they spend tens and tens of thousands more on university. I mean, what would you? Okay, let me ask. I know it's your podcast, but let me ask you this:
Go ahead.
if and when you have children, how will you educate them? I mean, will you put them through a traditional education system? Will you put them into a state school, an independent school? Would you homeschool? I mean, what would you do? What you have this?
It's a really important question, and it's something we have to think about. Anyone who doesn't think about that is doing their children a disservice. And
right.
Honestly, the education system is a factor in my decision to not have kids. At the moment, I know that sounds extreme.
Interesting.
But I don't think
Same.
that it's a healthy place for children if they want to maximise their own well-being as it stands today. I don't like how it is today. I mean, irrespective of that, I still wouldn't have kids right now. I suspect I'll probably have them, if I have them, probably within 10 years. So by the time I'm like 40-ish. And when I do, I really want to focus on that. I want to make sure those kids have the best shot in life. I want to really focus on what I'm doing now, do a great job of that, and then I want to focus on that. And rather than be one of these crap dads that does a half-assed job of both and is never there.
Right.
I mean, not only is that setting a terrible example, but it's also just not conducive to the kids' upbringing.
But it'll be interesting. When that happens, it'll be interesting for you to make that decision.
But that doesn't really answer your question. So to tell you the answer, like right now, if I had a kid today, I would have to put them through the system. I would have to.
Exactly.
But I would also try and equip my kids to navigate in a healthy way. And look, I'm conscious that I've probably been more critical, if anything, more critical than you probably about the system. I do have my gripes with it, but I wouldn't want to instill that in my child. There's a lot of good things in the system, and I would encourage them to get the good things out of it, whilst also being mindful of why it is the way it is, or how it is, firstly, and then why it is the way it is. And also give them some of my own education on the side. But I can't do that unless I have the time resources to dedicate to raising kids.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what you just pointed out there as well. Like, I was definitely more bitter towards the situation I ended up with, or in, I should say, before I started working. Actually, in the I'm not really in it. I'm kind of off to the side of it, I guess, because I work with students, and so I think having that perspective has given me a slightly softer stance on exactly what's going on potentially. But I'm with you. I would have a really difficult. I see some students who get an probably a better education being homeschooled. The problem is with homeschooling. The real problem is with homeschooling is the social aspect of homeschooling. What they get at school socially is, or university, or any of those environments where you have a lot of young people together is really important. I think.
I'd like to direct a similar question back. I know you've got to go before 3:00, but I'd like to send a similar question back your way as an honest education professional who understands the pros and cons. Okay. Should your kid go to university?
Oh, wow. You know what? When university, this will be slightly circular, but I'll get back to when university started. Well, not when university started, but let's say back in, I don't know, the 70s, let's say the 60s, when the proportions were so much different in terms of the people going into university. Now, some of that is to do with kind of class bands and people who could afford it compared to people who didn't. But I think those proportions were slightly better serving, actually. I think if you've got maybe 15 to 20%, maybe not even that, maybe 10%. But I mean, that's not going to happen. But if you have a certain percentage of people going to university and it is set up to offer something different, you cannot have you simply cannot have 80% of all people going through a system all getting the same thing and then expecting them to have an advantage in any way, shape or form, because it's supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
Now the supply and demand curve is skewed massively out of favor with, the student.
Yeah, I think ability is an absolute thing, right? It matters in terms of what it allows you to do. But
Yeah.
under what circumstances should it become a relative thing? Well, when the path is mapped out for you and there's only a limited number of posts available, that's when.
Right.
So that's the problem we have here, is that we're not focused on equipping people to deliver value, which is,
Yeah.
what we agreed was
And
kind
ability
of
is
the
not always
purpose.
addressed.
Mm.
Yeah, that's the thing. Ability is not always addressed in. I mean, how many things are we really assessing and kind of fundamentally basing ability on in like the current education system? Really, it's the ability to be good at exams.
Mm.
And unfortunately, a lot of what I teach or a lot of what what I do is help students get really, really good at scoring highly in exams, because that's unfortunately that's the outcome. Now I do try and give them that the kind of additional stuff, the coaching, 100%. But ultimately, quite often I'm being paid to help them get good grades, and that's getting good at exams, right?
Yeah.
But I think I would like to see more alternative schools. I would like to see people be bold enough to create schools which had a big focus on personal development, and even on things like, can you explain to me why things like meditation and mindfulness is not an absolute staple practice of any school regime at all? Like, because it fundamentally should be.
Yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it? Yeah.
So to answer your question, I know I have not really answered your question. I think, it's very, very difficult. It's a difficult one to really form a certain answer to, in terms of, at the moment, I think. I don't know.
It's a tricky one, huh?
The problem is when you have this kind of when you have this system like we've got now, a system by its nature has lots of kind of smaller systems feeding it, and so it becomes reliant on all of those other systems. If you think about kind of the way any of these systems are kind of constructed, it's never one thing we're talking about here. It's many kind of subsets, and so I think this is why it's going to be so hard to change, because about changing one aspect.
I know there's instances when this hypothetical child definitely should go into university, and there's instances when they definitely should not. And the key is knowing which is it, right? So
True.
I think there's a lot more people now that do go that shouldn't go than vice versa. Or there's a lot more people I would even say that most people that go now probably shouldn't go. But how to know? I personally think it comes down to this. It's knowing what you want to do with it. It always comes back to this, like knowing what your end goal is. If you know why you're going to university, what it is you want to do with your time, your life, and why, we have to follow this process. Know yourself, know what you want, know how you can get it.
Right.
And schools often, I find education tends to pursue this in the wrong order. Oh, you're good at maths. You are. What you want is a Audi A3 convertible. You're an accountant. It should be the other way around. Like, what I'm really interested in is architecture. Right? What I know about myself is I work well on my own, but I'm still capable of working with other people. I'm very creative, but I still have sufficient logic with which to back it up. I'm quite structured and detail-minded at the same time. And hey, I've got an interest in buildings. I'm not talking about me, by the way, but I'm just for anyone who's wondering. No, but once you understand yourself and you know that you can work in those kinds of frameworks, and you know that you want to work in that kind of environment, you know what that environment consists of, then you can feel, well, I've actually got the suitable skill set to make that happen. Maybe I can now go to university and study architecture. Yeah. So, but that applies to a very small percentage of people. The vast majority of people who are going through the system are not studying those kinds of degrees.
No. The degrees they offer, I mean, they should literally be whittling those down to a suitable number which are directly influencing a person's ability to be good at a particular profession. I mean, the problem to some degree with young people gaining clarity about what they want to do. Now, you can definitely get them thinking about it way more than they are right now. The problem with that is the landscape keeps changing. It's very difficult today, unless you're, there are some people who absolutely fundamentally know that they want to become a medical professional, like no problem.
Yeah.
There are some people who know broad industries, but look, we've both had the experience, and I know loads of people who have actually thought that they wanted to go to, they even for their whole lives, they thought, this is the industry I want to be in. For 10 years, I thought that I wanted to be a geoscientist.
Right.
And when I became a geoscientist, I discovered, actually, this isn't exactly what I really thought it would be like. It's not what I wanted to do. And so there is some element of experimentation which has to happen, I think.
Definitely. But what was it about that role that you didn't like?
It was more it was a corporate setup. It wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't the fundamental issue wasn't being a geoscientist. I truly believe I could get interested in just about any particular field. I have a diverse range of interests.
Yeah.
I don't think it was that. I think it was the working environment I found myself set in. It was like a little bit like a dictatorship.
Yeah.
In every occasion that I had an experience in the corporate world, and I no, it wasn't.
Yeah.
So that was it. It was more the setup.
That I hear you. I totally know what you mean, man. Dictatorship is a good word. I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about how a lot of rules often don't make sense. A lot of time wasted as a result of those rules. But perhaps more importantly, just the general negative vibe of the whole culture of managing through pain, and don't step out of line or you'll be punished. Trying to reinforce this ego and draining away any kind of identity outside of that. The more time you spend at work, the less time you spend outside work, right?
Yeah.
At work, as it were. I mean, at a workplace, and that's less time to express yourself in other ways, right?
But even at the workplaces I was at, what I couldn't get my head around is that even the HR department was not set up to understand and identify people, the people who are working there, understand what their drivers are, understand what their skill sets are, understand why they're there in the first place, have a good understanding about it, try and really understand and create a working environment which caters to the individual, not the other way around. Any organization relies on the people that work there. I mean, if you're just going to set things up to be a top-down hierarchy in terms of as the dictatorships we were used to, it's kind of crazy. And that's the same thing with the education system. It can't be a top-down hierarchy.
When did you leave that job? What year?
2014.
Right.
I had two.
Right. I feel like this decade is really seeing the gradient of corporate work getting more and more frustrating through this process of layer bureaucracy, life inflation, getting harder and harder and harder to deliver the same value. And meanwhile, the opportunity to go and do something fulfilling, to live life on your own terms, go where you want, work from where you want, do something that's more suited to your nature, that's becoming more and more appealing, and more people are doing it. And not only that, we're actually seeing examples of this everywhere. And this gradient just getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. I know countless people that have left their jobs now. Whereas back in the early millennium, people weren't really talking about this so much, and people were quite happy to have a job. Even 15 years ago, people were quite happy to be working. What's changed? Well, there you have it. That's what's changed. It's the appeal of the alternative and the burden of the old school approach. And I think we're going to see. This isn't going to hit a tipping point. I think where suddenly an awful lot more people are doing it. I don't think we're even there yet.
That's exactly the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Tipping point, critical mass.
Yeah, and I still don't think we're quite there yet. I think it's starting to happen faster and faster. But all I know is I know a lot of people who are looking to leave, and that's what I want to deliver with this channel, is giving people the tools,
awesome, man.
the toolkit to not only address freedom, the function of freedom, so building a business online, preferably, achieving physical freedom, but also internally as well. Because once you do that, you start to realize it's not necessarily, the blissful thing that Tim Ferriss cracked it up to be, unless you address your mindset in the process.
Yeah.
Learn to appreciate those things, especially because a lot of us are blowing away those old corporate cobwebs coming out of that environment and trying to rewire ourselves.
Yeah, they tend to be sticky.
Yeah, so I'm glad to say I think we've made a pretty good crack at that.
Yes. Well, it's still a work in progress, but it always will be.
Awesome. All right, dude. Well, one last question then. So, if people want to learn more about you, find you online, where should they go?
Oh wow, yeah. So I've actually deliberately not been hugely. I follow the kind of Cal Newport approach to things like social media a lot of the time. So I haven't actually built a lot of my social channels now because I find them sometimes to be more distracting.
Right.
But certainly, people can reach out to me. Yeah, good question. It's sometimes quite difficult.
Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram. Yeah, I sometimes I do use Instagram a little bit, but certainly, like you could link an email potentially.
What's your Instagram handle?
I think it's just Scott R. Dempsey.
Scott R. Dempsey.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Great stuff, mate.
But yeah, I mean, as I say, like it's another whole interesting debate that in terms of social media, does it work for you or against you? I mean,
maybe a conversation for next time. Yeah. You can do both.
All right, mate.
Yeah. All right, mate.
Yeah,
thanks for that. All right, okay. Nice one, Scott.
Thanks
Cheers,
for
mate.
yeah, thanks for having me on. All right. Cheers.